And now we're down to data objects. This is arguably my favorite part of Pimcore. I just love the way it was handled and the way that you create models and objects within the system. So let's go to the Pimcore documentation and see the definition for objects. Objects are the PIM part of Pimcore, and they are the way to go for managing structured data within Pimcore. They can be used for pretty much any structured data, may it be products, categories, persons, customers, news, orders, blog entries, etc. For the attributes, many data types, simple ones and really complex ones are available. Pimcore objects are literally objects in a sense of object-oriented programming. So the class definition can be defined through a user-friendly graphical user interface, but nevertheless, in the background, a plain PHP class is created. What does this mean? It means that when we go in the Pimcore administration, we have a graphical user interface which we use to add, basically right-click, add a type of data or like an input, a text, a WYSIWYG. You're gonna see it's amazing. And then in the background, a PHP class is actually created. So a file is created within our system that defines the class that we just made. Another thing that happens is upon clicking save, our database is created or updated based on the things that we added, the attributes that we added on a particular class that we were creating. We're going to go through this process. So if we go back to the Pimcore administration, I'm first going to show you an object that is already created. So let's pick this Monterey Car Vic Spring Edition. Here we can see what the actual object is made of. Here we have on the left side, or should I say in the center, we have some base data. Here we have the title, the short text, and here we have something that is called a field collection, which has a WYSIWYG inside it. And all of these fields are localized, as you can see. What does that mean? It means that for each language that was added on the site, we would have the same title and short text that we would need to fill out. Well, not necessarily fill out if they are not mandatory, but in general, you would fill out the text for each language so that when someone goes to your site in the English language, the title would be this. If the site is in German, they would have this text. Let me just quickly show you. So if we click on this site to go to the page where this object is used, we can see that it says the title in English. However, if we change it here to DE, we would see that now the title is in German. Let's just put it back to EN. And now you can see that we have some kind of gallery here. This is actually defined within this object here on the right side. We have, I'm guessing this is some kind of date when it was published. And that's basically it. There's not a lot of data currently here. The cool thing with field collections is that we can add multiple, or should I say copies of them. So a field collection is pretty similar to a normal object, whereas you can add certain fields within them. The difference is that you can make copies. Let's say this field is called content, and it actually accepts other field collections, and you can define which field collections can be put in here, as they defined the news cars field collection, the news links field collection, the news text. For this example, we're going to use the news text, and we're just gonna paste in and just put here in the title number 2. Save and publish that, and let's go on the page again and see if it's visible. And as you can see, it's now located under this. So you can customize your objects for let's say, for example, a blog post where you can put in content just like this in sort of segments. Maybe you would allow a certain other field collection just for galleries in the middle. Their current setup is so that under this main text, short text, they actually have their gallery set up, but you can make it totally customizable. Now that I've shown you the news object, let's create our own object. I'm just gonna create a folder here first where we're gonna create the other objects. So let's call it test objects, just so we know we're gonna put them there. And now we have to go here to settings, data objects, and classes. Here we have a button to add a new class. I'm gonna call it test. And here as the unique identifier, I usually put the same as the class name. Click on OK. And now we can start designing our model. If we right click on the general settings, we can add a new layout. You can think of the layout as the way that you want your fields to be located at. So if you don't necessarily want your fields to be right under each other, you would perhaps use the field set where you can set that your fields are right next to each other, or use the region where you can have certain fields on the left side of the screen, certain fields on the right side of the screen. That's what they used in this example, where they had the base layout, or should I say they used this region layout, and within them they had panels. One panel was located in the center. It contained all of these fields, and they had one panel on the right side, or should I say the east side of the screen. Right now we're going to do something pretty simple. We're just going to choose the tab panel. I'm going to show you what that does in a moment. We're not going to add a title, but we're just gonna leave it as is. And within that tab panel, we're going to add a panel. Now, if you change this name, that's going to reflect on the name here. We're just gonna call it general data. And this actually changes the name that's going to be shown, well, the panel name, when you go and create or edit an object of this type. Now let's say our test object is going to have an input where we can write some text. And we're just going to write here test input. It would first create a field called test input. This will reflect on our database as well. It will create a column within the database called test input. Down here, you can control the limits, should I say, of a certain input. For example, if we wanted this input to be mandatory and someone created a test object within Pimcore, they would have to fill in this field. I'm just going to check this so that I can show you what I mean. We can also put that this field is unique. So if you, for example, create a tag class and someone creates an object of a tag, you would want that tag name to be unique. We have the not editable checkbox, pretty self-explanatory. Basically, if someone goes into the Pimcore administration, this input would be grayed out and not editable. You would usually use this when you're programmatically setting, let's say, this input to a certain value, and you don't want necessarily the client that's within the Pimcore administration to be able to edit this. We have the invisible, which means that when someone goes to see a certain object, this input will be in a sense there, but it will not be visible to the actual user. If you check this, it means it will be visible in the grid view and visible in the search results. This reflects on the actual Pimcore administration and not when you're using it programmatically. You can also set custom CSS for this input, set the default value. As I said, basically all of these fields are pretty self-explanatory on what they do, so I'm not gonna really go through them. If you want to experiment with them, feel free to do so. And let's say we want to add a checkbox. You will go here to other, and here you have a checkbox option. Let's type in test checkbox. The tooltip, I missed that one. Basically, if you have a field that's not really self-explanatory on what it does, or it's pretty complex, or the logic of what has to be within the certain field is pretty complex, then you would put in a tooltip. One more thing that we can do here on this checkbox is let's put the default value to, let's put it to true. Click on save, and you just created your object. Now, if we go to this test objects folder, right click on it, go to add object, and now we have the test object option. If we click on it, we need to enter the name, or should I say the key of the object. Let's call it test1. That's actually going to be shown here on the left side within the object tree, and we can now see that the test input is mandatory, shown by the red star here, and we also see that by default the checkbox is set to true. If we try to save and publish, we're going to get a validation error which says empty mandatory field test input. Click on OK. Let's call it test1 and click on save. And that's it. You saved your object, and it's really easy to model really simple and really complex objects. Let me just close this. And on the top here, you can see that our tab that we created, general data, has been shown. A cool thing that we have but didn't really go upon is by clicking on the general settings, we have a bunch of things that we can do with this object. One of the things that we can do is add a parent class. So we would add a path to our parent class if needed, implement certain interfaces, and etc. Again, the field names here, or should I say the labels, are pretty self-explanatory. We're not going to go too much into detail here since this is a more, let's say, advanced topic of Pimcore. Let's create a new tab here and call it Field Collections. Don't forget to put the title here. If I didn't put the title, then it would create a new tab here and it would be empty. Within this, we're going to add a new type here in the structured data types. Click on Field Collections, and let's add a collection. We can call it test content. And now, here you can see that we actually have to pick the name of the field collection that we want to add. And I want to show you how to create a field collection, and so we don't have to pick one of the options that are already available. We can save and publish this for now. Go here to Settings, Data Objects, and Field Collections. Here you'll see all of the field collections that are already made in the demo. But we're going to create a new one, call it Test Collection. As you can see, it's pretty similar to creating a class. Here we're just going to add a panel, so no tab panel, just a normal panel. Call it test data, and here as a data type we're going to add a select. The select is going to be called test select. We're going to add some options to the select, so call this test1 and test2. And another field that we're going to add is going to be, let's say, another select that's going to be called country. So test country. And we're going to also add a input that's going to be called test input. Test input, and okay. Save this. And if we go back to our classes, click on the test class that we created, click on the field collection, and now if we go down here, we can find our test collection. Click on it. By clicking on it, you're adding it as an allowed type. You can also define how many test collections can be added within this test content field collection. Click on save. And now if we go back to this object and refresh it, we can see that we have a new tab. Clicking on the tab, we can see that we can add field collections here. Now, the select options that we added are now visible here. A use case for field collections would be, let's say if you have customers and the customers can have multiple, let's say, addresses, or you have an object which has multiple of given fields, if that makes any sense. Let's just keep to the customer option. So if your customer has multiple addresses and each address basically has the same fields to fill, you would use a field collection. And now since we put the country field type, as you can see, you don't have to manually, as you do with the select, add options. You can just search, let's say, Croatia from the list, and we have another test input. Click on save, and there you go. Those are your collections. And just for testing purposes, I'm going to add another one. This one's going to be test2. This one is going to be, let's say, Argentina, and test2 input. Click on save, and that's it. Now that our object is created, what if you wanted to, let's say, show it somewhere on the front end? Let me show you how you can do this. Well, since we here know that the object ID is 1131, now we know which object to get. If we go back to our default controller where we added a test action, we can remove this first part, and it's very similar to fetching the assets when it comes to the logic. We would type in, let's say, test equals, we start typing test, and it should hint us the name of the model that we want to use. And since we created the model called test, it's giving us the option here. Click on enter, and here you can see that we have a get by ID method that we can use, and we said 1131 is the ID of the object. And here, instead of asset, we're going to put in test and test. So this is what we want to send into the template to render. If we go to the template, we aren't going to have this data anymore, so we're not gonna use it. Here what we can do is just type in test input was the name of the field that we used here, as you can see. And now if we save that and go back to the front end, let me just go to that particular page, and here you can see that it wrote test1 as it says here. What if we wanted to, let's say, show all of these field collections? Well, we need to do a couple of things first. First, we need to add an if. We need to add an if because there's a chance that someone didn't add a collection. So this means if they didn't add the collection, it would be null. So what we would type, let me just double check what the name of the field was. If we go to classes, click on test, and it's called test content. So if we go back to the code, type in if test content is not null, and if, then we will for each the test content items. So to do that, add a for test item in test.test content dot items. and the 4 here. And now if we go into the structure of the collection that we allowed here, so go to data objects, field collections. Here we have the test collection, and these are all of the fields that we have. So if we wanted to show the test select and let's say the test country, the thing that we need to do here is type in test item dot test select. And if we want to show, for example, the test item dot test country, let me just put this into P's so it doesn't end up rendering right next to each other. And yeah, that's basically it. Let's go back to the page, this one. And as you can see, this is the test one. We also put test one in the field collection select here. And we have the country. In this case, it shows the country code, not the full name of the country. We have the other select that we added, and Argentina AR is the country code, 2-digit code. Now, what if, for example, we had multiple objects here within this folder? Let me just quickly copy and paste, let's say 3. So now we have 3 basically of the same. I'm just going to call this test2, save, and test3 and save. Now, what if we wanted to list all of these out? Well, again, we can do this in a couple of ways. We can use a listing to get all of the test objects within the test objects folder. To do this, we would type in, let's call this tests equals new test listing. And now within this test variable, we can set a condition, and the condition would be that the object path should be equal to /test objects / test objects is of course the name of the folder here. Now, how did I know that the column was called OPath? Well, you can check that by going here to Tools, System Info and Tools, and Database Administrator. This will open up the database, and here you can actually find the table that's used to store your data. If we scroll down a bit, we should be able to find it. Here it is, object test. If we click on it and click on select data, here we can see our objects that we have. And the OPath is what actually defines where the object is located. So we're going to query this by this string. And now let's go back to the code. Here we can see that we have the tests variable, and we're just going to pass it to the view. Go back to the view. And one thing that we need to do here now is add another for each. So should I say for? Call it test in tests. Push this a bit. Let's copy this and for, and it's going to be located here. And now if we refresh the page, this is pretty ugly, but you get the point. Let me just put this within a P as well. And maybe at the end here we can add an HR just for it to be a bit clearer. There we go. So as you can see, we loaded all of the objects. Another way in which we can do and get basically the same results is by going back to the default controller. This really depends on what your needs are, but you can, in theory, do it this way. We can make a new variable, call it test objects folder. We can use the data object service to fetch us the needed or create the needed folder. We have a method here called create folder by path. It accepts a string, and we need to call it the same way as the folder is called here in Pimcore. And what this method does is it creates a test objects folder if it doesn't exist, and gives you back the object of that folder. However, if the folder already exists, it just gives you back the object. And now, since all of the test objects are basically children of the test objects folder, here we can just call the method get children. The thing here is that you can't do any sort of pagination or additional filtering, so it's very use case dependent. Now let's check out the result on the front end. The result should be completely the same. As you can see, after refreshing, the result is the same. Hope the video helped you, and if you want to learn more about Pimcore, you can check out my Udemy course called Learning Pimcore from Zero to Hero, where I will show you all of the steps from creating a project, buying and setting up a server, as well as deploying your project. Hope to see you there.